which is where Shedeur was probably going to be. I think people made a big deal out of the draft party that Shedeur
Right.
had at his house, and then the after party that he had after he got drafted. And these things are all, used as negatives, even though it's like this. He grew up rich. He's a rich
Yeah.
kid that's got a lot of money, whether he plays it down in the NFL or not,
Right.
because of his dad and NIL and all that stuff. So it's become a fascinating conversation about the NFL kind of parading as a meritocracy. And to me, what comes to mind, the image that comes to mind, it's almost like a graph of there's a line, the y-axis or x-axis is talent, y-axis is distraction, whatever
Right.
you want to call it. And it's like there has to be a point where those two lines meet where it's acceptable, and anything beyond that on the distraction side, quote unquote, becomes unacceptable in the realm of the NFL.
And what's
And
so funny about that though is that we're talking about, let's say all the rumors are true that Shador in these interviews was completely obnoxious. We're talking like Carlton Banks from Fresh Prince levels of obnoxious,
like all
right?
the memes of him, insulting them, walking in with, 100 pounds of chains on and all
Yes,
that stuff.
let's
Yeah.
assume all of that is true. How is any of that more offensive than, let's say, the teams that have, gentlemen who've been accused of like domestic violence? How is any of that more offensive than gentlemen who've been accused of sexual assault or like, racism and homophobia and all these things? How is this kid just being like a Richie Rich kind of kid more offensive than any of those things that are like, some of which are like actual crimes? This is the problem that I have with sort of like the moral inconsistency that the NFL often demonstrates. We're like, oh, he doesn't fit. He's not a part of the culture. Like, how is it okay for this person who's like, driven drunk or whatever the case may be? Like, they're good for the team. Like, like make it make sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it doesn't hold up to any level of scrutiny. I think that logic, at least. I mean, if you're just talking football and the culture of football, the almost, militaristic culture of
Right.
everyone needs to fall in line, and we can accept your, you know, I don't know what you want to call them, off-field indiscretions,
Yeah.
which is, I think, maybe that's a bigger conversation about being a man and masculinity in America and what's
Totally.
acceptable among men and what's not. But that's a whole other podcast. I think that's probably
Absolutely.
far beyond our scope. That's definitely like an academic level conversation, I think.
Oh,
But
for sure.
I mean, ultimately, what do you think convinced the Browns to draft him? 144th overall. I guess they were finally able to overlook the bad interviews because we got to a certain point in the draft and they already have four quarterbacks on their roster. Like
Right.
it was all so strange that, especially the fact that he ends up in Cleveland, who already drafted a
Yes.
quarterback. Like, why Cleveland?
I mean, I've heard reports that like what ultimately convinced him was the owner's insistence, right? So that always helps. But you know the audacity of having reservations about him while you're still employing Deshaun Watson. You know what I mean? Like just like, hello, read the
Yeah,
room, my friends.
there you go.
So that's that part. But I can't imagine Shador not being able to compete for that starting job, especially with Deshaun still being out. I really just don't imagine a universe barring injury or any sort of catastrophe where he's not at least in the conversation, where he's not coming out of training camp as at worst second string. It just would astound me beyond belief. I really do think that, and this is not me saying I think he's going to be a Hall of Famer, but I do think he's going to have a productive NFL career if given the shot, if the NFL is the meritocracy that it often pretends to be. I think he will have a sustainable NFL pro career. But I do think that ultimately what was able to convince them was the owner's insistence and just the absurdity of it all. Like you all, even with the three quarterbacks you have, still very much need Shador. Like I don't see a reality where that's not true for the Browns. Like let's be honest and be realistic. Like we're still the Cleveland Browns. I don't know what sort of high aspirations you have, like, but you should actually just be real about yourself in this case.
Yeah, Cleveland is the quarterback graveyard. It's one of those franchises. The Jets. We were talking about the Jets before the hit record.
Yes, Mark.
the Bears, I don't know. There's a list of NFL franchises where quarterback careers go to die, and that was my worry when he got drafted by the Browns. Was, oh
Of course.
man, Cleveland, like that's not
Wasn't
the best
exciting.
situation, exactly. But the silver lining, I think, is he's one of four quarterbacks. They have Kenny Pickett, who is a journeyman at this point. Joe
Yeah.
Flacco, who's I think at 40 at this point, so he's not anyone's long term solution.
No.
But it was just curious that they spent two picks on quarterbacks, and he's going to be competing with Dylan Gabriel, I think, essentially for that starting spot, unless of course they go veteran first and all that. But that's the silver lining, is that there is not an established starter that he's going to have to overcome. It's not like he got drafted to Kansas City or Philadelphia or some of these other teams that took quarterbacks late, as this is clearly our backup. This is the guy that we're going to develop for the next couple of years as a cheap backup. So that's the only silver lining. And I think his preseason games are probably going to be some of the most anticipated,
No question.
even more so than Cam Ward. I mean, no offense to Cam Ward, but you're the number one overall pick. Everyone is expecting you to succeed, right? And it's almost going to be kind of that Jake Paul phenomenon or the Floyd Mayweather phenomenon, where people are going to be tuning in because they want to see you fail.
Yeah,
And
that's real.
so,
That's real.
I mean, I'm not one of those people, but I just from the social media reactions I've seen of me posting clips
Oh,
of Shedeur,
totally.
it's rage bait for no
Yes, it
reason.
is.
It's an
It is.
innocuous clip of him throwing a touchdown to Travis Hunter, and it becomes this huge argument about him and his dad and all that
Well,
stuff. So